Major Events in American History by Megan DeVarney Forbes. A First Chapter Friday Read Aloud video with The Word Nerd, an interview with the author. Hey teachers, check the video description box for some freebie worksheets related to this to help your students stay on track and engaged through the whole video. One last thing before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Mrs. McKay's classes at St. Joseph's Cathedral School in Jefferson City, Missouri. I'm so glad you're here and hope you enjoy this book and interview.
Hi, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week, I'm going to be reading to you from the nonfiction books, Major Events in American History, 50 Defining Moments from Pre-Colonial Times to the 21st Century, written by Megan DeVarney Forbes. Now, students, that name might not sound all that familiar to you, but teachers, if you are on Instagram, Megan is the creator behind Too Cool for Middle School. Something like 50-some thousand followers. She was California Educator of the Year not too long ago, and she just has amazing things not only to share in this book, but through her social media platforms. So definitely check that out. And after I read to you from this book, we're going to get a chance to talk with Megan both about her writing and about her teaching. So definitely stick around for that. My kids are history nerds. They love presidents. They love learning about things in the past. And so I actually bought them this book as a Christmas gift a couple of years ago. And when I was searching for things to share on my channel, I was like, oh yes, this is definitely one that we need to share. So let me tell you a little bit more about it by reading to you from some of the first few pages. It says, the history of the United States of America. Writer and political activist Marcus Garvey once said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Today, people living in the United States are like leaves on a tree branch, connected to the roots that came before them. Learning about history shows us how to grow strong and healthy, and it teaches us how to bloom. So the events in this book are divided into 10 major time periods, stretching all the way from early America in 1050 to 1600, all the way up through 2020. It says through the present, so 2024, but this book came out a couple years ago. 50 different events from defining moments. And let me tell you a little bit more about that. The story of America includes so many people, places, and ideas that it's impossible to fully tell its history in just 50 events. But in this book, we're going to use 50 events to talk about some of the most defining moments in American history. What is a defining moment? It is an event that changes the future forever. Sometimes these events are good. It was exciting when we could all use a light bulb to light our houses. And sometimes these events are bad, like being attacked and going to war during a very scary time. Sometimes the events are good for some people, but bad for others. For example, Thomas Jefferson was happy to buy the Louisiana Territory, but the indigenous people who lived there were not happy at all. As you read about these events, consider how they impacted different groups of people and how people's lives are still being impacted by these events today. Many of those who made a lasting impact on history were regular people with big dreams. They believed in an idea or a cause, and they didn't stop working on it until it changed the world. What are your big dreams? With the knowledge of the world changers who came before you, maybe you will be the one to spark the next big event in history. So, also accompanying in this book are these really great illustrations. And it's a colorful book. It's fun. It's divided up into those different 10 sections of history, each one color coded, which makes my little word nerd heart happy. Okay, I'm not going to read you the first couple. I picked two random ones that I thought people might be interested in, and we're going to share those. So the first one is the election of 1860. I know that we in our country just got done with the big election, so elections might be on people's minds, and I thought that this would be a great event for us to learn from. So the election of 1860 is one of the two events I'm going to share with you from the book Major Events in American History by Megan DeVarney Forbes. Abraham Lincoln was elected as the 16th U.S. president, but actually he did not receive any votes at all in 10 of the U.S. states. His election was very controversial. It marked an official divide between the northern and the southern states. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin in Kentucky. He learned mostly by teaching himself, but he became a lawyer and a politician in Illinois. In 1848, he became famous when he ran for the office of senator. Lincoln lost the election, but his campaign speeches made him very, very popular. Everyone was talking about the issue of slavery. For nearly 100 years, the United States had made strange compromises. They let southern states practice slavery while most northern states did not. As new states were added, southern states wanted slavery to be allowed everywhere. That way, free states could not overpower them. But the northern states were afraid that if slavery was allowed, the slave states would have too much power. Some people, called abolitionists, wanted slavery to end immediately. They wanted Black Americans to have the same rights as citizens. Other people, like Abraham Lincoln, were against slavery, but they believed that it would have to end gradually or take many years. Some people even thought that after enslaved people were freed, they should all move to Africa, a continent they had never been to before. During these tense years, Lincoln became a popular politician in the Republican Party. They chose him to run for president in the 1860 election. He ran against other politicians in the South, but he was not popular there at all. He won most of the votes in the North, which had states with very high populations. So Lincoln won the presidential race even though he got only 2% of the votes in the South. Southern states knew that Lincoln wanted to end slavery. They were furious that he was their president. 7 states immediately broke away or seceded from the United States. They formed their own country called the Confederate States of America. They chose Jefferson Davis as their president and announced that they would protect the rights of white people who owned slaves. President Lincoln was determined to keep the United States together. He knew that he could not do this while the country was still divided over the issue of slavery. As soon as his presidency began, he made extremely difficult decisions about the freedoms of millions of Americans. And this is a quote from Abraham Lincoln at the end of the chapter. Let us at all times remember that all American citizens are brothers of a common country and should dwell together in the bonds of fraternal feeling. And then at the end of every chapter, there's also an explore more. So if you're curious about this event in history and you want to learn more, the author gives you a place that you can do that. Sometimes it's a place on the internet. Sometimes it's an actual physical place, like in this case. If you are ever in Springfield, Illinois, make sure to visit the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum. Rather than being a traditional museum, it uses special effects and technology to make visitors feel like they are actually living in all of the exhibits. Really cool. I have never been there, but now I'm adding it to my list. The second event that I wanted to share with you was further in the future, still a while ago, before I was alive, but further into the future, and that is the moon landing in July of 1969. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy set a goal for the country: to send a man to the moon by the end of the decade. The United States just barely made the deadline. During the 1960s, the United States was competing with the Soviet Union to produce the best space technology. The Soviets sent a man into space in 1961, and then a Soviet woman followed in 1963. The United States created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, to study the science and mathematics necessary to create rockets. The Apollo program tested many rockets and worked for years on the science and technology to send humans to the moon. Not every model was successful. It took hundreds of engineers, mathematicians, scientists, and administrators to plan a successful mission to the moon. It also took billions of dollars. On July 16, 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins strapped themselves into a 363-foot rocket ready to fly 240,000 miles to the moon. The Saturn V rocket propelled the astronauts into the atmosphere, and then the bottom portion broke off and floated away. It'd be too heavy to carry the whole rocket all the way to the moon. Another section of the rocket propelled the astronauts into space, where they orbited the Earth. While they orbited, mathematicians in the control center did some final calculations before another portion of the rocket launched it out of the Earth's atmosphere toward the moon. For 3 days, the astronauts floated toward the moon. Once they reached the moon's gravitational pull, they prepared to land. Armstrong and Aldrin used another detachable part of the rocket to land on the moon while Collins stayed in orbit. Armstrong and Aldrin did something no human had ever done before. They walked on the moon. They called President Richard Nixon from the moon and planted a U.S. flag. They took some samples of rocks from the moon and captured it all on video. Finally, they reattached their portion of the rocket to Collins's, and all 3 astronauts descended back to Earth. By this time, they were inside a small capsule. They released a parachute and landed in the Pacific Ocean. Today, the United States has an international space station that U.S. scientists and astronauts work on with people from several other nations. The technology from satellites helps use global positioning systems, GPS, and cell phones. 12 astronauts have walked on the moon. Some companies are working on technology to send people to the moon as tourists today. The quote at the end of this chapter is from a plaque that is placed on the moon. Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind. And then the Explore More section has this to say. The mission to land on the moon would have been impossible without the mathematical calculations of women like Katherine Johnson. Read her autobiography called Reaching for the Moon, or watch the movie Hidden Figures, which highlights the incredible work of Johnson and her colleagues, Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson. So, typically, I like to read nonfiction in bits and pieces. I don't want to read a book like this all at once because it's so much to digest. There's so much information and almost too much to think about all at once. And also, there isn't a narrative arc to keep you pulling through the whole thing. So this is a perfect book to read, one chapter a week, or just set it, by your bed and read one chapter a night. As opposed to sitting down and doing all of it at once. Bits and pieces is a great way to do this, and maybe just even section by section. Teachers, it's a great book to pull from whenever you're talking about this particular topic in social studies. I just loved it so much, and I think that you all will as well. Even if you don't, here's the other thing, especially with a nonfiction book, you don't have to read the whole thing. Like, as a rule follower, like, I was shocked to know that not all people read a book from cover to cover. Like, when I was in college, I was like, what do you mean you didn't read that whole chapter? You don't have to read a nonfiction book in its entirety. You can just pick out the pieces that are most interesting to you, and it's not even like cheating. It's just reading what you want to read. So take that little nugget with you as we go and chat with the author, Megan DeVarney Forbes. I will see you there. All right, readers, we are in for a treat today because we are going to get a chance to talk with the author of Major Events in American History, teacher and author Megan DeVarney Forbes. Megan, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We are so excited, and part of the reason I'm excited is because you are both a teacher and a writer, and so that leads into my first question. That is, amongst all of the other things that you have to do in your day-to-day life, why did you add writing books to your list?
Well, it was during the pandemic, the first time that I added this task to my to-do list. So I had been approached from some publishers who do history books a couple of times just because they know that I know history, but then I also know like how to write at a student level. Like I know what types of things are going to hook students, and then like the reading level that, students are going to like work best at. And so I had turned it down a couple of times, but then when it was mid 2020, I think, and I was at home and I did have a little extra time. So I was doing a lot of like reading anyway. And so I was like, okay, well, I can turn this reading into a book. So that was the first time I agreed to it. That was why. I'm working on another book right now, actually. And I'm like, gosh, I need someone to prevent me from leaving my house again, because otherwise it's really hard to do.
Yes, finding the time is definitely the first step. You kind of mentioned this a little bit in that last answer that you did a lot of reading, but what is your favorite research tip? So this is a nonfiction book, and I don't share a ton of nonfiction books on my channel, but I love this one so much. And, we're in November and election season and learning about all the things. I know my kids at home have tons of questions. They're like, so what about that? But what is your favorite way to do research when you're looking for true information on things that happened in the past?
I just always look for multiple sources. So that's one of the reasons that like writing a book does take a long time for me, is because for every topic, I have another purple book right there that's like 15 biographies. And so for each of those people, I read at least 2 books, and then would, maybe like listen to some podcasts if there were some history podcasts about people. Sometimes there are good like YouTube videos or documentaries. So you can find good research sometimes like in different mediums, or maybe like audiobooks. For me, for research, I really actually need to see it though, so I can like mark things up and highlight. But just sometimes to like get the background information in my head and just kind of get the context, I would listen to podcasts or listen to books. So I was always making sure to get multiple just kind of takes on each topic or each person or each event, because just different people bring different perspectives into it. And so it's always just important to do more than one source.
Yeah, I think that is so important, whether you're writing a book or just in everyday regular life.
Yeah,
And
it's a good practice.
yes, and I love that you said, different styles, two different formats, whether it was like an audio podcast or it was a physical book. So definitely a good reminder. What is your favorite writing tip or like your best writing hack?
Um, for me, if I'm sitting here writing for 2 hours, sometimes only like 30 minutes of those are going to actually include some writing. So you just kind of have to figure out like your own procrastination style. I feel like writing is a lot
Oh,
of just
yeah.
like procrastination management. And so I'll sit here and like make sure I've answered all my emails before I start writing, or like, oh, let's go like finish typing this up before I start writing. And so kind of like pay attention to what you're doing when you're avoiding writing, because so much of writing is just procrastination. And so there are little things that work sometimes, like timers. I'll set a timer on my phone for, maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes where I'm not going to open a new tab. I'm not going to look at my phone. I just have to sit there and get some words on a page, and I can always edit those words later, kind of mess with those words, but it's very hard to work with a blank page. If I'm just sitting there staring at a blank page and then kind of looking at my phone and opening some things, that blank page gets me nowhere. So at least getting some words on a page that you can work with later is very helpful, even if you could feel like you can only concentrate for about 20 or 30 minutes at a time, maybe even 10 minutes at a time, but it's better than nothing. It's better than that blank page.
Yes, that connects to I was doing a lunch bunch Zoom with author Rob Renzetti yesterday, and his advice was no idea is a stupid idea. All ideas get to be on the page, and then you get to make decisions about them later. So
Yeah.
I love that those two coincide. I mentioned this before, but you are a middle school teacher. I was a middle school teacher for a long, long time, and people when they hear middle school, they're like, "Ooh," and I'm like, "Oh no." Middle school is my favorite. And so my question to you is why middle school? What's your favorite thing about working in a middle school and teaching middle schoolers?
I really enjoy it. I did do like my student teaching in high school, and I was kind of applying for a lot of high school jobs, but what I ended up getting was middle school, and I kind of always like planned on going back to high school. But then just after getting to know like the fun things that you get to teach, for one, like I thought the ancient history was going to be really boring to teach, but it turns out it's really, really fun. And then, eighth grade history is really, really fun. When I was in eighth grade, that like sparked my interest in history when I was in eighth grade, and like learning about the United States, learning about like women fighting for the right to vote and all of these different things. I was just like, what? I didn't know all this. And I got so excited to learn more history. And I see that in my students as well. Like it's such a cool time in their lives where they're a lot of things are new to them. Most information about the past is new to them, but they are still really excited about it. We can do lots of like fun activities, and they're still kind of like up for, doing some skits or like making some videos and just doing fun, silly things as well. So I've really found my place in middle school, I think. And I like the students, I like their energy. Sometimes it can be a little too much, but for the most part, it's really fun. And we just get to talk about really interesting things that, bring in cool conversations, and they have their ideas about, what went on in the past and how they view those things. So I think it's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I love middle schoolers too. And you kind of touched on like that the kids like aren't too cool for school yet, which leads me to my last question. And that is that you share a lot of stuff online at your Instagram profile, Too Cool for Middle School. And also you put a lot of energy into sharing, great content in these books, and then also a lot of energy in the classroom. And what is like there has to be some like internal motivator for that, because it is, I'm sure, a ton of work to do the thing at school and then to share so generously with all these other teachers, like thousands of teachers, to put energy into the book. So like how do you do that, Megan? How do you like what motivates you to like do this good work?
Well, when I first started teaching, it was an era of like YouTube was really popular for like tutorials, like makeup tutorials, or maybe like outfit inspiration, or like if you needed to change a light bulb, like you would look on YouTube, like how to change this style of light bulb, and it would show you. And so I was always like looking on there for teacher things. Like I was a new teacher, like, okay, well, like how do you set up like classroom management plan, or like, okay, well, how do you lesson plan? How do you, what does a whole year look like? And so I would go to YouTube for those things, but they weren't there. And so I was like, well, I'll just put them up there then as I do them. So when I would, decorate my classroom, or kind of, set up different stations in my classroom, or come up with my syllabus, or just even just kind of like figure out lessons, like, oh yeah, this lesson turned out really good. I'll share this on YouTube, just because teachers, for the most part, once we're done with kind of like those classes where we go and observe people, we're in our classrooms for the next like 30
Mhm.
years, and you don't even ever get to go see what anyone else is doing. There's just no opportunity to do that. You're working all the
Mhm.
time. So it's nice to have things on YouTube, things on Instagram, TikTok, where at blogs were like a big thing kind of right
Mhm.
before I started teaching. But just because you can get great ideas from other people who teach in other places, and that's just a very, very hard thing to do in your day-to-day teaching life. So I love the internet for that. I've gotten so
Mhm.
many ideas from other people. There's so many things that I do that were other people's ideas that I read in a blog or saw on YouTube or saw on Instagram. And so I'm just really thankful for the fact that teachers have this opportunity to share with each other that we really never had in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great way to have our own little teacher community, um, even when we are far, far away, like in California and in Wisconsin. So, or I should,
Exactly.
that's mirrored. I should
Yeah.
do in California and Wisconsin. So awesome. Well, thank you, Megan, for your time and answering these questions. Thank you for this great book. You hinted at it before. Can you tell us what you're working on now?
Oh, now I'm working on one about ancient history. Well, about Greek goddesses, like females of ancient Greece. So, ooh, that one is going to be really exciting because I know that my sixth grade students, where I teach ancient history, we have a guest. They're really, really into like Percy Jackson and ancient
Yeah.
Greece. And this one wants pancakes. Yes, I will get you pancakes. But that one is going to be really exciting. So it's coming out sometime next year. But
All
this one
right.
keeps interrupting me while I try to write it. So this is another
Well,
writing hurdle.
good morning. I
Say
hope.
hi.
Hi. I will let y'all go so you can get some breakfast and eat some pancakes. But thank you so much for joining us, readers. We will see you here again next week for another First Chapter Friday video. Happy
Bye,
reading. See you
guys.
next time.
Bye. You want to
To
say
continue
bye?
reading Major American History by Megan DeVarney Forbes, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the video description box. Thanks for visiting my channel, Learning with Word Nerd. I hope you come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, direct teaching instruction videos, and more. Please like this video, subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Happy reading.